Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome all of you back to another Christian article. Now, if you think the lighting looks a bit strange for this video, that's because I'm actually, for the first time in 9 months, I'm actually making a video in the morning. And unfortunately, because the window faces east, and obviously since the sun is still basically rising at the moment, also, I have to shut the window because it's freezing cold outside. Very unusual for this time of year, if you ask me. But, and also because part of the light is actually on the screen, which basically just shows, like, nothing but dust. I really need to, like, clean this somehow. I think I got rid of most of the dust anyway. Okay, so we're going to do another Christian article today, and that is Manajerks. Manajerks, a portmanteau of manager and jerk, are villains featured in Solitude comics, most prominently in the sub-episodes, who regularly antagonize Chris's comic book counterpart. They are based on a multitude of real-life store managers who all threw Chris out of their places of business for being a creepy stalker during his love quest. In the comic, the Manajerks are all superpowered agents of the private villa of corrupted citizens, whom Chris and his team of recolors regularly need to neutralize. After his adventures on the 26th of December 2014, Chris began using the term ass manager to refer to his victim, the GameStop assistant manager who he had pepper sprayed and who ultimately took him to court, as he had every right to do so. Actually, that's kind of like a really interesting step, is that despite the fact that what Chris did, it was so obviously his fault, he still refers to the victim as the ass manager and as somebody who was instigating the violence, and Chris calls himself the victim in every single circumstance. Shouldn't you not like go to, like, if it were up to me, I reckon I'd seriously, give Chris some pretty harsh time for something like that, to even despite everything that happened, despite all the evidence, Chris still calling himself the victim, which I think is a bit insulting to those who actually suffered through Chris's wrath, let alone the death threats he posted to all the employees of Sega. That just seems like there needs to be harsh reprimands for that. Artist rendition of Being Manajerk based on Chris's depictions. It's Goldar with who is I don't really recognize who this actor is, but Goldar, and is that like Burger King or something like that in the background? Origins. Chris coined the term in Quick's diary to describe the two Charlottesville Walmart managers who confronted him on the 22nd of June 2005. He has since used it in reference to other perceived enemies, including the managers of his local Target, the management of the Fashion Square Mall, Michael Snyder, and another Walmart manager who ejected him from the chain's Ruckersville location in the summer of 2013. Manajerks in real life. Real-life Manajerks, or as they're known to people who aren't infantile buffoons, managers, are employees responsible for organizing other employees to accomplish desired goals within a business. While sometimes frustrating to those who work under their supervision, tell me about it, I could tell you some stories, managers usually seek to only improve the productivity and prosperity of their workplace, thus benefiting both customer and employee alike. Seems fair enough, doesn't it? At times, the duties of a manager can sometimes require them to take charge of difficult situations. Again, I could tell you plenty of stories of that. Such as a patron who loiters in the workplace, purchasing nothing and using the facilities as his personal retreat. Such situations can have a negative effect on the business. For example, if the hypothetical patron happens to be unwilling to shower and have numbers of pairs of dirty, cramped briefs, his odor might prove distasteful to paying customers. Similarly, if this purely fictional patron purely fictional patron should happen to hold a sign expressing his desire for intimate relations with young white women who aren't autistic or police officers, it might also put off paying customers who would find the patron crude and bizarre. Even worse, if such a patron were to vandalize store property or engage in similar property destruction, it's often a manager's responsibility to step in and inform the patron that his behavior is inappropriate for a place of business. If the patron becomes unresponsive or difficult, even to the point of, saying, assaulting said manager with pepper spray, the manager may also be charged with contacting the proper authorities to have him escorted forcibly, if need be, from the premises. I have a feeling this is foreshadowing. Manajerks in Sonichu. Oh boy. In the pages of Sonichu, manajerks like jerk-ops, college deans, CAD instructors, and other authority figures are all tyrannical cockblockers who want nothing more than to ruin Chris's life. To this end, whenever Chris enters a public place to spend hours drawing comics, playing video games, building crude sculptures with pixel blocks, and panhandling for sexual favors, these evil manajerks descend upon him like the Gestapo, ordering him to leave and never return. Just as Chris refuses to recognize the authority of private security personnel and the police, he also dismisses the manajerks as having no say in how he abuses their business. It's also worth noting that Chris seems to have only a nebulous grasp of how businesses work. For example, his suggestion that you tip the waitress the next time you visit your local GameStop. Oh, I got paid. Speaking of patron, I got paid off a patron myself. Go me. Which may explain why he takes their actions so personally. Since Chris tends to assume all of his enemies are conspiring against him in one great monolithic organization, he depicts the manajerks and jerk-ops as operatives of the same Chris-hating team, with Mary Lee Walsh as its leader. Similarly, Chris also assumes that any perceived attack against him is an attack against anything he believes he represents, and so the manajerks' other enemies are depicted as being anti-romance, anti-virgin, anti-autistic, etc., etc. It's too early for this, but I've got to say, absolutely none of those things are true, because what they actually are, they are anti-sexual solicitation, they are anti-prostitution, and most definitely not, they are not anti-autistic, they are anti-loiterers. That's what that's meant to be, and Chris does all of those without even realizing it. Though Chris has depicted manajerks numerous times in the comics, not much is actually known about how they operate. Unlike jerk-ops, who have known to target any and all lovers in the city of Quickville during their invasions, the manajerks seem to target Chris and only Chris. This would seem to make them appear to be assassins of a sort, but Chris is only ever seen being attacked by them while in stores, such as Target, Walmart, or McDonald's. Which may instead suggest that the manajerks are really the store managers, but they just happen to be evil, love-hating foot soldiers of PVCC as well. Following the revelation in Solitude issue 10 that all the manajerks are brainwashed just like the jerk-ups were, this seems most likely. It's the closest thing to explanations we ever get from Chris's comics, so there you go. Of note, however, is that Chris refers to all the stores where these confrontations take place by a comic book alias. In the comic, he isn't getting thrown out of Fashion Square Mall, he's fighting in a far square of Showmall region. Target is similarly referred to as the Guitar region, and Walmart is the Mall Wart region, and the McDonald's in the Walmart becomes MC. Why even bother renaming them? Because Chris, it's not like you haven't like renamed characters before. It's the locations shouldn't be an issue either. The manajerks are shown to reside in and possibly rule over these regions, as Sonichu issue 7 refers to manajerk Scott Palazzo as having banned all virgins from his region, which seems to suggest that the Manajerks were not restricted to just being soldiers, but were more like warlords. This of course raises the question, however, of how bad things have to be in Quickville that terrorists are able to take over the whole shopping complexes and declare ownership of them. That's because, well, brings into question how good Chris's authority really is. B. Manajerk. B. Manajerk was a Manajerk first featured in Solitude Issue 3 and Solitude Issue 4 to date. He is one of the only villains that Chris has ever been able to defeat single-handedly, as almost every other one-to-one fight Chris has ever had in the comics inevitably ended with him getting beaten half to death until he was saved by another character. Not much is known about the B Manajerk, not even his real name. What little we do know comes from Chris's own records of their encounters, as described below. If Chris's accounts are anything to go by, the B Manajerk was the manager of the McDonald's in Walmart that Chris got kicked out of. Or else, a subordinate to the man Chris identified only as a married senior comic. What? One way or another, Chris was kicked out of the McDonald's, but felt that he was still entitled. He felt that he was still entitled to loiter in the rest of the Walmart and play with pixel blocks, since this was outside of the B Manajerk's jurisdiction. He called in the manager of the Walmart to deal with him, at which point Chris ran off like a little bitch. Okay, that's a bit of a change of pace right there, which Chris seems to consider a brilliant tactical victory. Based on a true story, apparently. No, for love, trust, and a girl for me show respect. Look at the way he smiles up there, just... June 22nd, 2005. Let me begin with this entry with what happened 2 days ago. I had my setup at the McDonald's at Walmart, and apparently complaints were made. The two Manajerks, a senior comic and a black fat jerk, he looked a lot like the leader of the jerk-ops at the mall, whom I refer to now as the Jerkief, approached me and took me for a fall with my trying to find a boyfriend-free girl, like I had been doing for the past 1.5 and 10 months. We argued and disputed until the two of them left to call the police. Well, because Chris, what I suspect happened is that they told Chris to leave because of numerous complaints about his behavior, most likely from other, store employees, and Chris refused to leave, which meant that they were going to call the police because he refused to go along willingly. While they were gone, I had taken off the sign for my Nintendo DS and hidden it on the back cover of my diary. When the jerk-ops came, they were all like, "What seems to be the problem?" And the married senior comic was like, "Where's the sign?" And I was, "What sign?" And another argument was had between the four of us, in which I never gave any of those jerks eye contact, because none of them deserved it. That will make you look even more guilty, Chris, so that's a very, very, interesting tactic if I've ever heard one. So I got kicked out from the McDonald's, not the Walmart, for the rest of the day. Now, for what had happened today, I was starting to set up my things and the B manager was getting in my face. I feel that he really hates me. Couldn't help but figure out why. And he was like, "Don't set up your stuff here, don't push me." I was not going to use the Nintendo DS sign today. Anyway, but he did not want my pixel block sculptures at all. I stood up against the Manajerk, I continued to build, and I dictated my situation into his face, with a song and dance. Chris, in court, there's a reason why they don't do stuff like that. He went up to the Walmart manager, and he was like, "Hey, let's talk." But I sat silent for a minute. Then I said to him, "I do not speak to any man other than myself because they all have taken all the pretty girls, leaving me with none." And with that, verbal combat had started, and during the fight, I ran off, still giving verbal punishment as well as da finger and many Cursier Hamehas. I nearly backed up onto him with my car, and I gave him another finger. Then I dashed off. So let me get this straight. Chris uses logic bordering on insanity. He continues to be a nuisance to members of staff. He gives lies to the police, nearly runs somebody over, and thinks it's appropriate to just give him a finger, and still he will call himself the victim. How long ago was this? 2005. So Chris would have been 23 years old. So imagine me and Chris were the same age, both 23. And I think the difference would be almost black. It will almost be day and night. The Bee Manajerk first appeared in sub-episode 4, which was featured in Solitude issue 3, and reused in Solitude issue 4. In this embellished version of the real-life encounter, Chris sits peacefully at the McDonald's, which he terms MCDville, in Malwart region, until the Bee Manajerk and the Merry Senior Comic confront him preemptively. While the Merry Senior Comic has cybernetic arms and legs, and Bee Manajerk is arrayed in golden armor, wears glasses, and has a round head, looking like a great deal like the Jerkief, as Chris describes in his journal entry, he is also armoured with a gold axe and a pair of large guns. Bee Manajerk explains that the Jerkief warned them about Chris, and since having a mate of any kind of violation of Malwart law, they plan to intercept him, using mecha Jerkops on loan from the Jerkief. Though outnumbered, Chris stands his ground, and Darkbind Solitude comes to his aid, destroying the Mecha Jerkops and defeating the Merry Senior Comic so that Chris can battle the Bee Manajerk one-on-one. He transforms into Chris Chan Solitude, and the anime wings he had been wearing on his head transform into working wings. Similar to the wing hat power from the Super Mario 64 video game, the Bee Manajerk uses rocket boosters mounted to his back to confront Chris in an aerial duel, but Chris uses several techniques to confuse and misdirect him, including a decoy made of pixel blocks. After defeating the Bee Manajerk, Chris lectured both of his enemies on the importance of his love quest, and the absolute necessity of his attraction sign. The Bee Manajerk would briefly return in the pages of Solitude issue 7, when he and his fellow Manajerks attended the Council of Villains at PVCC, where Mary Lee Walsh announced Chris's disappearance into the time void. Contrary to popular belief, this was actually not the last anyone saw or heard of Bee Manajerk and his partner, however, like it was for so many others before them. Though he was never actually seen again, the Bee Manajerk was mentioned during the events of Solitude issue 9, towards the end of the issue, whilst Sonichu and Rosedew return from the battle against Natesurk, Giovanni, and Robotnik. They receive a psychic message from Magi-chan, informing them of the state of the battle. In the same text wall in which he announces the death of Ivy and the destruction of the Decepticlones, he briefly mentions that Bee Manajerk and Merry Senior Comic had somehow grown to a gigantic size and took part in the battle with the rest of PVCC. The battle is nearly actually shown, but Magi-chan assures Solitude and the readers that they were defeated by the Kart Megazord owned by the Quick Power Rangers, and that the two of them were shrunk back to their original size. The Kart Megazord itself is briefly glimpsed in the background. Something people might have actually have wanted to see, and Chris could not be bothered to draw it for love or money. This would be the last time the Manajerks were ever seen or heard of from in the comics. In Sonichu issue 10, Chris would use his Colossal Chan form to completely destroy PVCC and undo the brainwashing effect used to control all of its members. According to Mailbag 52, this freed all the Manajerks too. Chris later stated that the Manajerks were cleared by the Quickville courts for their crimes, due to the fact that they couldn't help their actions at the time, but they were depowered before being set free. And yes, the B in B Manager does stand for black. So they would send. So hang on, let me get this straight. They sent, all the Manajerks and that free, but they execute, the Asphodesia 4. Doesn't really seem that fair of a deal, to be honest.